Well, hello there, everyone. I'm Rob Mayo, the current chair of CILT Northern Section Committee. I'm here today along with my committee colleague Jan Sujal, and I'd like to formally welcome you all to today's webinar on supply chain safety working in and around vehicles. Today's webinar is brought to you in association with WorkSafe New Zealand and ShopCare. I'd like to welcome from WorkSafe Ruth Cook, and from ShopCare Liz May, Catherine Ross, and Wes van Deventer. Work-related vehicle incidents are a major cause of fatalities, a major cause of injuries, and an ongoing risk to the health and safety of workers and to the general public, both in New Zealand and internationally. It is thus in the interest of we as logistics and transport businesses to be aware of the regulations, the guidance, and the information from government on vehicle safety. WorkSafe New Zealand has made working in and around vehicles a priority focus area. Initial research in 2019 identified 3 areas of key risk factors. 1, business and industry practices. 2, fatigue. 3, risk from other vehicle users. The 2019 research illustrated that interventions to improve health and safety outcomes for workers should address vehicle safety at a more comprehensive level, include all vehicle users, and address the complex interplay between workers, their workplace, and the environment. As a participant in today's webinar, you're already well aware that you have a duty of care towards the health, safety, and well-being of yourself and your colleagues in the workplace to ensure that everyone on your premises at the end of each working day goes home healthy and safe. 2 major areas will be discussed in today's webinar. Firstly, how we get better health and safety outcomes in supply and logistics operations, how we increase the use of higher controls and get beyond relying on low-level minimization practices. Today's webinar includes an interactive Q&A session, so please, during this webinar, please use the Zoom Q&A function to ask questions of the speakers. The webinar today is being recorded. It will be made available on the CILT website, the CILT YouTube channel. A copy of today's presentation from WorkSafe and from ShopCare will be uploaded to the CILT website. I'd like to now hand over to ShopCare and to WorkSafe to guide us through today's webinar and the interactive Q&A session afterwards. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob, and great introduction. So thank you to the team at CILT. It's wonderful to be here today to co-host this session with you. So before I introduce Ruth Cook, I want to tell you a little bit about ShopCare, but before I get to that, we'll just run the very first one of our polls. So Jan, I think you're running the polls today. If you wouldn't mind just popping up the first poll.
Yep, the poll is up.
So Jan can see how many people have completed the poll. So take Jan's word when to pull it down. So interestingly, with polls, we only have an option of 10 choices. So hence your industry may not precisely be there, and that's the reason.
It's at 80% now.
Yeah, we've still got attendees ticking in as well, so they'll be ticking in and seeing the poll. Last few people. How are we going, Jan?
5 more people. Well, it seems like these people may be busy with other stuff.
That's right. Let's close it off, and so this just tells us who's on the call today. So not surprisingly, a vast majority of people in transport, postal and warehousing. That's great. Thanks, Jan. And we'll have another couple of polls for you through the course of the webinar. So thanks, Jan. So I'll just talk for a few minutes around shop care, and I'll introduce our team. We'll chat for a couple of minutes around our individual projects. So shop care is a not-for-profit health and safety sector group. We're a group of industry members leading industry to improve health and safety across retail, supply chain, manufacturing and transport. So quite a wide number of sectors with a large number of people and businesses. Shop care has been running for about 18 months and was started out of an old industry safety working group. Very long story short, people who were working on health and safety as part of their day job, but realised that really to make any significant difference, there needed to be dedicated people working on this for these industries. So we put forward a proposal to ACC. So we're funded by ACC, and some key industry members have provided funding for us to run. Excuse me. So ShopCare's role is to drive industry collaboration through a coordinated approach to knowledge sharing and problem solving. So how do we do that? Profile best practice methodology, create knowledge sharing opportunities, so just like this one, and develop industry agreed standards. And there are lots of ways that you can get involved with ShopCare and take advantage for your business of what we're doing. And one of the easiest ways to get involved is when you actually have a problem in health and safety, then please contact us. And if we don't have the answer, we'll get in touch with our network and see who can help you, and perhaps connect you to somebody who can help you move your problem forward. And we're all about connecting people to people and people to solutions. So I'll introduce the team. First of all, Wesley, who has a long career in health, safety and wellbeing in the marine, manufacturing, engineering and retail sectors, and Catherine Ross, who has a long career in the education sector. So Wes and Catherine are going to talk you through our key work streams, and then Wes will talk you through our critical risk piece of work, which we're really excited about. Lots of things happening there. So before I hand over to Catherine, there'll be another short poll. Thank you, Jan. And the answer to this question will be revealed in Ruth's presentation in just a few minutes. How are we going, Jan?
80% now. Do you want me to end a poll?
Let's give it another few seconds. There might be people pondering. Hopefully there's nobody Googling. I hope people aren't Googling the answer and then putting it in. Okay, let's close the poll, Jan, and see what. Okay, so vast majority of people are saying 73%, followed by 43 and then 23. So Ruth will talk more about this, as I mentioned in her presentation. So I'll hand over to Catherine, who will talk a little bit about projects and ShopCare.
Liz, kia ora everyone. So as Liz said, we are just going to talk about some of the main areas that we are spending our time on at the moment. And I'm just going to start you off in the sort of 2 o'clock position in this clock. And one of the main streams of work that we are involved in, and is my sort of main area of work, is transport. And it's quite apt that this week is Road Safety Week. And if you weren't aware, you might see a number of structures across New Zealand lit up yellow, and that's to basically signify support for Road Safety Week. I think potentially Caroline Perry, who's the Break New Zealand director, is on this webinar today as well. So just a shout out to Caroline for all the work that Break New Zealand, the charity, does to support Road Safety Week. So in terms of transport, we all know that's a really significant area where harm exists and harm occurs. And what we as an industry sector are looking to develop is an industry-led health, safety and wellbeing charter for change. And that will be a focus on vehicles as opposed to marine or aviation. And our main focus is around heavy goods vehicles. And we'll look to the whole breadth of the supply chain from gate to plate, if you will. And what we know that happens is that people often have the same problems across the sector, and somebody else will have that problem, but somebody else will also have a solution. So what we aim to do is actually get people together to work on an industry hierarchy of change and to have proven best practice to solve those issues and to share. So it's really around collaboration and sharing. So we know that what works in one sector, what works in one business may work in another business, or may be slightly adjusted to help that business out. So it's really to prevent that reinvention of the wheel and to share and collaborate. And we work alongside industry and have support from government agencies rather, such as WorkSafe, ACC and Waka Kotahi. So we're trying to move that forward at the moment. If you'd like more information about the transport charter that we're in the middle of developing, then please get in touch with us and our details will be at the end of this presentation. Secondly, we have another significant focus on site traffic management and mobile plant and equipment more generally. And as we talk to businesses, we know that a lot of risk harm happens around site traffic management. So wherever there are people and mobile plant vehicles interacting, there is always going to be a risk. And again, it's around what are those main risks and how do people resolve those risks or manage those risks as best as they possibly can. So we've been working with WorkSafe quite closely to help deliver and provide information that WorkSafe have been developing. So for example, recent guidelines on site traffic management, we have worked alongside Ruth to help industry be aware of those guidelines and what they can do to get up to that next level within their own business. One other thing that we've been doing is industry sharing sessions whereby people can join a call or a Zoom session like today and just talk about what has occurred in their business and if anybody else on the call has a solution to that or maybe have encountered a similar issue. So it's really around just helping and sharing. And in the future, what we are aiming to do in this space as well is actually set up industry site visits. So if you are interested at all in hearing more about those, then please get in contact with us through the details at the end of this presentation. I'm now going to hand over to my colleague Wes, and he's going to talk to you about some of the other project streams that we have at the moment. Thanks, Wes.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Wes. I look after the manufacturing, retail, and supply chain side of things for Shopcare. And if you look towards the 7 o'clock region, I'll start off there with manual handling. Well, that's a big focus currently for us as an industry from a workstream perspective. We focused on musculoskeletal harm prevention, mitigation, and management, not measurement. But in doing that, we're seeking opportunities, for example, educating some businesses in the area of what's the difference between, for example, what's discomfort and injury, because there's quite a number of confusion between what's discomfort and what's an actual injury. We're also looking at pre-employment functional screening. So what we're trying to say there, for example, is that a lot of workers or might not be fit for the purpose of the role. So we're trying to do some functional screening, making sure that we got the right individual for the right role. So we don't put them at a higher risk if we give them that posting. And then it's something that's pretty much standardized in more mature health and safety and well-being organizations is injury management. But yet again, being New Zealand, there's quite a broad range of organizations that are not on that maturity scale yet and wanting to get onto that journey. So we're just trying to help them on that journey. So we're going to try and standardize some of that injury management processes and procedures, so we can help out with those organizations getting on board. That will help, rehabilitating those individuals, getting back to work sooner and quicker, and not just actually just staying off work and doing nothing. Next one will be violent and aggressive behavior. Well, that's quite a big focus from the retailers and any other customer-facing roles and businesses, especially from the public sector. These customer-facing individuals, there's a growing concern that they are facing, verbal and physical abuse on a daily basis. So much so, if I can just take an example of one retailer over the last 2 weeks, has received quite a number of these types of events. One for being, physical abuse, and to an extreme event where a couple of store workers were unfortunately attacked with a weapon. And the other one was, some of these new threats that are popping up, like, for example, challenges on social media, where you actually bring a lot of people at risk when it goes up in a blaze, for example. So that's quite a big focus from a retail perspective in addressing those issues from a violent and aggressive behavior. And then lastly, from a workstream perspective, we're looking at critical risks. So this is a very important workstream for us, and one that takes most of my time as well. Is that from an industry perspective, we do not know what our critical risks look like. That said, we first had to deem what is our critical risk within this industry and to seek those opportunities. So we went out and asked all sorts of organizations within our industry to say, can you share some of your critical risks and controls with us so we can have an idea? We sampled quite a number of that, and we built our first view from a critical risk and controls perspective. We shared some of that, and we can pinpoint some of those areas of opportunities that we can strive on. So some of that will be collecting of data being transferred into valuable insights. We're also looking on online educational series, things like risk management and governance, as well as industry bow ties. We'll also be, well, Catherine has mentioned a bit earlier on, I have been conducting critical risk and control sharing sessions over the last 2 months, and our next one will be next week. And this is where businesses just come together and they'll just share their current experience. There's no prep work involved. They just discuss and say, this is the critical risk or the issue I'm trying to resolve or have resolved. And the issue, this is how we went about it. This is the impact of it, and somebody on that call will find value in it, because we've received quite a number of rave reviews regarding the individuals that have been sharing. Because yet again, there's no competition when it comes to health and safety. We're all trying to just share a bit of good work that everybody's been doing, because we know there's a lot of good work being done, and it's just happening in silos, and nobody's actually sharing that. And hence why we created this critical risk sharing sessions, which has been going very well. If you want to know more about that, please hit me up, and I'll get you on one of those. We also will be developing a critical risk report with some insights. We're in the last stretch of that, and hopefully we'll make that public very soon, and maybe run a bit of a series around unpacking that report from an industry perspective. So what does it look like, etc. And then lastly, from a critical risk and controls perspective, is that we are building a resource. So that resource would look like, just on the top of my head, would be, you'll have an array of critical risks on our website, for example, and then you'll be able to say, oh, I know transport, this section of transport is a critical risk. So what does it look like? If you click on it, it will open up a hierarchy of controls for you. Anything from elimination right through to administration. So yes, great. That's already, you've got a good list of start off with 10 from all the critical controls you can implement for that particular critical risk. But the next step is, how do you do that? So the aim is then, if you see one of those controls, that you click on, and it will bring you up an option or options of what a generic control would look like for that particular critical risk, and will set you on your way to develop that in your own business. So that's something that we are currently passionate and working on, and hopefully that will be available soon as well. And then while I'm on critical risks is, earlier on I talked a bit about collecting that data and turning it into valuable insights. Well, we've done quite a bit of that, and we have come across our top 7 most common critical risks. I'm not saying these are the most important critical risks, but the most common across the industry. And number 1 is no surprise there. That's site traffic management. It goes on to on-road safety for light vehicle passengers, hazardous substances, working at heights, mobile plant and equipment, machine safety, and then coming in number 7, heavy vehicle transport. So no real surprises there, but we are focusing on those 7 for now, and so we can make some real impact within the industry. What is interesting as well from collecting some of this data is that that's something that's really been well spoken about across New Zealand is psychosocial harm did not feature high up within even our top 10 of critical risks that's been identified. Now, that doesn't mean it's not important and it's not being done. Maybe organizations has just not identified it as a critical risk. The other thing as well is it's also interesting is that health as a critical risk. So for example, long-term health effects from working in a hazardous environment, etc., has also not been identified by quite a number of organizations in our sample pool. Yet again, it might be due to they haven't done it yet, or they're not on that journey. And something else that I can just call out, for example, is in the transport sector itself, light passenger vehicle driver safety is from the sample pool we've collected is not well represented. So if I look at all the transportation organization that provided our critical risk, light vehicle driver safety is not well represented with that organization. Why that is, I'm not sure. Maybe they've already solved that critical risk, and if that's the case, I would love to hear what all their solutions are, so we can share that with the rest of the industry. Or maybe they're not on that journey yet, where they can actually take light vehicles as a critical risk. So in a nutshell, that's our critical risk work stream and project that we're currently working on. And if you want to know a bit more around this area, please don't hesitate to get in contact with me. And before I hand over to Ruth and Liz, Jan, if you could be so kind and just launch poll question number 3 for us. Thank you very much.
So this one's a multi-choice option. How are we going, Jan?
77% yet.
Oh, yeah, give it another few seconds. Great, thanks, Jan. Let's close it off. Gosh, that's a wide variety, isn't it? Certainly this one, with only a limit of 10 options, this one was very difficult for us to choose which was going to make the list of 10. Thanks, Jan. So I'd like to introduce Ruth Cook now. Ruth Cook is an engagement lead at WorkSafe, and she does that. And just before I hand over to Ruth, I'd like to thank Ruth for, this is the last in the current series of webinars around working in and around vehicles. We may do some more, but Ruth's been wonderful, and it's been thrilled to be able to connect with all sorts of people right across New Zealand through the webinars we've been running, Ruth. So thank you for turning up in all sorts of places and times.
Hey, pleasure, and thanks, Liz, and kia ora to everybody. It's a great opportunity to be speaking to you all, and grateful to be with people who are passionate about safety and doing work well. Now, health and safety when it comes to working around vehicles is really important when it comes to serious injuries or the events that we are notified here at WorkSafe. Vehicles accounts for about 3% of those. So about 3% of notifiable injuries, or about 3% of serious injuries, are linked to working in or around vehicles. But when we think about fatalities, that number jumps right up to 73%. So 73% of our workplace fatalities involve some kind of vehicle. So whether you're operating a vehicle or working around a vehicle. You may be wondering which vehicles are causing the most harm. Well, out of that 73%, it's of about a third of them, or just under a third, involve trucks. And another third involve mostly agricultural vehicles, whether it's tractors or ATVs, and then the final third is there's a mixture of light passenger, utes, motorbikes, mobile plant, and forklifts. You may also be wondering, well, whereabouts is this harm taking place? Well over half, so about 65% of those fatalities occur off-road. So we know this is not just an on-road issue, but harm is also occurring off-road, whether it's in warehouses, construction sites, or other kinds of sites where people are interacting with vehicles. Having said that, the majority of these fatalities are taking place off-road. We know that a good 23% of our annual road toll is somebody driving for work. So that figure is not about commuters, it's not about bystanders, that is somebody driving for work. Now, I said that the fatalities are significant, but also injuries play an important part as well. It was interesting to see that at the beginning, about 15, and that most of you with the transport, postal, warehousing sector, every day in 2020, every day there were 1,500 people from the transport, postal, warehousing sector who were not at work because they had a work injury. So they not another illness or other thing. They had a work injury that meant they had at least a week off work. So that's 1,500 people every day within the transport, postal, warehousing sector in New Zealand not at work because they have a work injury. And I know that a sector like yours, where it's difficult to find skilled people, that is having a real impact. So vehicle harm, important, but it's also important to remember, and if we could just go on to the next slide, Catherine. It's also important to remember that the fatalities and the serious injuries that I've just been talking about are actually only about 11% of the total burden of harm caused by work in New Zealand. So you can see it there in that pie chart. There's a little segment which has acute and catastrophic harm. So when we talk about health and safety, that's the safety portion, those acute injuries. And actually, by far the biggest proportion of the burden of harm borne by our New Zealand workers is as a result of issues caused by exposure to long-term health issues. So there you'll see that we've got hearing loss, we've got cancers, there's mental ill health, there's musculoskeletal. And when we're thinking about working in and around vehicles, it's really important also to mention the 22 people a year who die as a result of exposure at work to diesel exhaust fumes. It's important to talk about the people who have long-term lower back issues as a result of working or driving a vehicle off-road, or having an ill-fitting or a seat that's not fit for purpose. So it's really important as we go into our discussion today to remember the whole burden of harm, which is costing all New Zealanders. So working in and around vehicles is causing issues and harm for our people. If you are asking yourself, well, what is it about working in or around a vehicle that is causing harm? We'll go on to the next slide and have a look at some of those key harm mechanisms that we see here at WorkSafe. So site traffic management, already been touched on, that complex, dynamic, ever-changing interaction between people and plant, often in a very busy 24/7 environment. The other thing is load management, so load falling out of side loaders, for example, or off forklifts, falling onto people. Other falls, people tripping while they're carrying, or falling out of vehicles. Non-use of seatbelts, so we know that still about 10 people a year die at work because they are not wearing a seatbelt while they are operating a vehicle or plant. This next one I'm going to come back to because it really is significant, and this is the upstream pressures. The fact that you've got people who are operating a vehicle or working around a vehicle being exposed to risk on a daily basis, and yet the decisions about managing the risk and about the work activity are made upstream by someone higher up in the organisation, or very often in another organisation, and that those decisions have a direct impact on the vehicle operator or the person working around the vehicle, but they're not able to manage those risks because of their work activity. And the last one there, diesel exhaust fumes. I've already mentioned that. That's exposure to diesel exhaust fumes, most likely in an enclosed environment. So those are the key harm mechanisms that we see. Might be great in our discussion time if we have available time to hear about the kind of things that you see in your work environment. So the size of the challenge in front of us is large, and if we're to see a change in the harms caused by working in and around vehicles, I think we all know that doing a bit more of the same is not going to work. That doing more signage, more small scale action is not going to work. That really the size of the challenge in front of us means that really courageous action is required, big change. And we need to be all thinking about how we can do things differently. So a few questions to unpick the courageous action required and what that might look like for you. So first question is who is to lead this courageous action? And the answer to that is that those with the most influence need to step up. Legislation says that that it puts responsibility on businesses to manage the health and safety of its workers. Yes, workers have responsibility too, but the burden really rests on businesses to manage that. And it's so important that we are not pushing that risk down onto people who are least able to manage it. People like owner drivers, people like contractors, subcontractors, people who with little employment stability, or people with little ability to change their work environment or change their work activity in order to respond to pressure or risk. And so this is a call to business owners, to directors, to managers who need to be showing that they are ensuring that all reasonable steps are being taken to protect people working in and around vehicles. And directors who have probably the most influence over behaviour change will be a future focus for us here at WorkSafe, as we recognise the need to move our focus from the people at the bottom who are exposed to risk but not able to manage themselves, and to start focusing on those who have the most influence over business decisions. WorkSafe as the regulator, we will support, we will encourage, and where necessary, we will enforce. But our call is to leaders, influencers, managers, directors within the business to step up and lead the courageous change that is required if we are to see a reduction in those people killed or injured because they work in or around a vehicle. So who needs to lead? Those with the most influence. Secondly, what is the scope of the action that is required? So what is the scope of this courageous action that is required? And the answer that the scope of the action extends as far as your influence. The Health and Safety at Work Act says that you are not only responsible for your own workers in your own business to ensure that they get home healthy and safe, but there is also a duty to ensure that anyone whose work you influence is also able to get home healthy and safe. So you're not only responsible for your own workers, but also those whose work you influence. And so my question to you is, do you know whose work you influence? Do you know who is influenced downstream by your work activity? Do you know what is in place to look after contractors or subcontractors who are operating vehicles on your site? Do you know if the drivers that you buy transport from or buy transport from you are able to transport their goods safely and have enough time to complete the work without pressure? Do you know if they are operating vehicles that are fit for purpose and have the appropriate safety features? If you are a landlord, do you know if the contractors and subcontractors who use your site have safe systems in place for operating vehicles? Do they have enough room for turning? Are they able to operate vehicles safely? Is there good separation between plant and people? And I understand that for you in the logistics industry, that thinking about who you influence can open up really new conversations with other businesses with whom you have a responsibility under the Health and Safety at Work Act to work together with, to coordinate, to communicate around those shared risks and how to ensure that they are being managed appropriately. It's not you cannot outsource that risk to anyone else, and you cannot make assumptions that where there is shared risk that it's being managed by someone else. There is a duty of care on businesses to actively coordinate and communicate with other businesses to ensure that downstream workers are not being exposed to risks. So that means that health and safety, the scope of health and safety actually becomes conversations about contract management, about procurement, about the tendering process. Health and safety is not just a responsibility of the health and safety manager or the head of health and safety in the organization. Yes, they have a key role in facilitating, but actually it becomes health and safety needs to become the responsibility, part of the everyday fabric of running a business, because it cannot be separated out. So what is the scope of the action that is required if we're to see a reduction in harm caused by vehicles? Well, the scope must extend as far as your influence. So where you influence others and their work, you have a responsibility to be involved in managing that risk. And perhaps that will sort of initiate some really interesting conversations as a group around what that might look like. Because I realise I'm just touching on issues light touch this afternoon in this session because we haven't got lots of time. So how do you prioritise the action that is required? We've said there's lots to do. We've said that the scope of your action is as far as your influence. So how do you prioritise which things need to be done first? And the answer to that is start with the steps that are most effective. Start at the top of the hierarchy of controls. So I don't know if we could just put up the next slide, Catherine, just to remind us what the hierarchy of controls says. It says that under the Health and Safety at Work Act, there is a legal obligation, a legal duty to first try to eliminate risks altogether, because that is the most effective way. So what does that look like in a vehicle context? Well, first of all, making sure that the journey is necessary, avoiding journeys where possible. I know that in your sector, most of the time, those journeys are necessary. So is there opportunity to completely separate the areas where pedestrians work and where vehicles work? Can you introduce overhead walkways? Are there other things you can do to completely eliminate the risk? And if elimination is not reasonably practicable, then we start to move on to minimizing the risk through substitution, isolation, control measures, through engineering controls. So we're thinking about really good, robust separation, not just painted lines, but robust separation between people and plant. Perhaps interlock brakes or interlock starts, automatic emergency braking or interlock starts or handbrake alarms, whatever those engineering controls that are appropriate for your workplace. I really encourage you to have conversations as a group and also with shop care to look at what are the most appropriate controls in your environment and in your workplace. And if there is still risk, if still there is residual risk, then only then we start to move on to the least effective controls, signage, instructions, processes, training, and then finally PPE. So when it comes to working in and around vehicles, the most effective control will always be elimination. And now I understand that is also the most expensive control often, or at least it can be to start with. It might not necessarily work out over the lifetime of the control, but that's why it's so important that managers, that directors are part of the risk management process, because they need to understand that the obligation and the most effective controls are elimination and those higher controls in the hierarchy of controls. So yes, there is work to be done. Yes, courageous action is required by those with the most influence. And yes, the scope of action required is probably bigger than you realised. So it's really important that as you prioritise your work, that you start with the most effective controls, that you start with elimination and work your way down. So I talked earlier about the fact that change is required by a number of people, that we all need to be doing something different. And I also include us as a regulator here. And so just before I wrap up, I want to touch on a couple of things that we're doing. Catherine's mentioned that we are looking at how we can produce better guidance for those who work in and around vehicles. So there'll be more of that. And we have got an organisational wide prioritisation of the safe use of structure, plant and vehicles. So expect us to be more active in that area, and we are also increasing our proactive visits in the transport, postal and warehousing sector. So you're most likely to be seeing more of us. As well as increasing our prioritisation in that area, we are also increasing our focus on upstream responsibility, on procurement, on contract management, on the influence that organisations have on those further downstream. So expect us to be more active in that area as well. I'm really keen to sort of come into land here to allow people to ask some questions and perhaps initiate some discussions. But just before we do, I want to just leave you with two questions. We've said that courageous action, that change is required. So if we are to see that reduction in vehicle-related harm, what courageous action can you take? And then secondly, how can WorkSafe support you in doing this? I know that my details will probably come up at one of the later slides, so please do get in touch. But thank you again for this opportunity. And I don't know if we've got any questions coming up on the Q&A
We do, Ruth.
stream. Liz, great.
We do, which is fantastic.
Awesome.
So we've got a couple in
Right.
chat and a great one in Q&A first. So chat came in first. So I think this relates to the data. So are farming situations included in those numbers that you talked us through?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, great. Next question was 73% death, 3% injury equals 76%. What's the other percentage made up of?
So those are 73 and the 3 are the the different parts of the pie. So 3% of all our notifiable injuries or serious injuries are linked to vehicles. 73% of all our fatalities involve working in and around a vehicle. So it's so I guess if we're to think about what the other fatalities are, that might be one place we could start. So remembering these are acute fatalities, so it doesn't include sort of deaths caused by cancer or respiratory diseases. But they will most likely be forestry deaths or falls from heights. So those are the other two big categories.
Okay, great, thanks, Ruth. Now, Ruthie, there's quite a long question on Q&A. I think everybody can read that. Jan, I think everybody can read Q&A.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Bit long for
Yeah.
me
No,
to read
thanks.
out.
Thanks, Diane. So I suppose first of all, I'm just as I sort of oh, I've just lost your question. Let's scroll. So yeah, so absolutely the importance of culture. I suppose what absolutely that culture, a poor working culture is one of the key ingredients of work of harm caused by working in and around vehicles. And if we're to fix it, absolutely a change in culture is required. We do need to acknowledge the part that culture plays in a workplace, and we know from our surveys that organisations with the poorest health and safety outcomes are also those organisations where, as you say, Diane, yep, she'll be all right, or oh, it's just common sense, just do what you're told. I've told him what to do, he's just not doing it. So whereas organisations with a better performing health and safety performance are also those organisations that have a better health and safety culture, where people are really looking out for each other, and so absolutely fun, great
That's a great
point.
question.
I think it's so to your I mean, I suppose I just also say is, you know, agree with you that if we are to see change, then that's got to start from the top, with leaders leading the way, and creating a culture where workers can speak out and are listened to and are part of the whole process in identifying and managing risks. So yeah, absolutely, agree, 110% with your point. Thanks, Diane.
Yeah, look, I think it's a great example of, you know, solving this problem will be, well, it's going to be difficult, but it'll be easier if we do it together, and easier if we do it by connecting with each other and sharing stories and what's worked and what hasn't worked and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a couple of more good questions in Q&A. So someone's asked, so training is the least effective approach.
Look, hey, I don't want to be put on record by saying training is ineffective, and that don't bother about training, because obviously having a competent person is really important. And if you've got an effective risk management system, there will be controls from across the hierarchy. So I'm not advocating don't bother training, but we know that the thing is with training that it still comes down to relying on somebody to remember their training, and still relies on it's still open to human error. And so you want to ensure that you are looking first to make sure that if you can sort of put in place controls which do not rely on a human being doing the right thing at the right time, because we all know we make mistakes, and that we're fragile and forgetful and tired, and at times emotional or whatever. So the most effective controls are those which don't rely on people doing the right thing at the right time. So I'm not saying training, forget about training, but at the end of the day, it still requires them to remember and do what they have been trained to do. And the other thing is about, from an investment point of view, if you're thinking about how you invest in training, where you've got to always retrain, people forget what they've learned, and as soon as you get a new person in, you've got to start that training process all over again. Whereas if you implement a higher level control, say an engineering control or a substitution, well, the tail of your investment lasts that much longer. If it's an engineering control, you've got it for the lifetime of that plant. Or if it's an infrastructure control that you've separated out an area or put in a new overhead walkway, the benefit of that will be there even though people leave. Does that make sense? So on a few levels, the high level controls are always going to be most effective, and that's why the law says we've got to start there.
I think the other interesting thing about training is that just because someone's trained, it doesn't mean they're actually doing it safely.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, another interesting question from Murray, who's asked, we hear a lot about high-risk industries from WorkSafe. The list is usually agriculture and forestry, possibly fishing. Why is transport not given this emphasis to highlight its importance?
Yeah, no, thanks, Murray. And I think two things there. Firstly, that the injury stats and sort of the lag indicators are showing that the injuries and harm occurring in the transport sector are increasing. So we've only become aware of that really in the last couple of years, and we are giving it increased importance. That's why for our proactive inspectors, they are now making up to about 15% of their visits in the transport, postal, warehousing sector. So, and we are increasing our focus on vehicles and plant. So, yeah, realizing that we've probably come a bit late to the game, but we're really looking to have a bigger impact in this area, realizing that it's so important to New Zealand economy, but also a lot of the people in the industry are sort of squished in the middle, or the meat in the sandwich, where they're not really able to make decisions that can to improve their work, that those decisions are made elsewhere. So look, hey, really looking to increase our focus in this area. And Merrin, I've just seen Merrin's question around fatigue and stress. Absolutely agree that truck drivers are often left to the end to hear about things and to get support, and the pressure that they have to work under is immense. And that's why we're really wanting to work higher upstream and to ensure that people who make those decisions about that work activity, about the timetable, about the prioritization, about the plant and the site, that they have a responsibility to manage risk for truck drivers, that it's not just left turned to truck drivers. So yes, education is important, but that shouldn't just occur down the bottom of the supply chain. Those with the most influence should be really changing the way that they do their work and the way that work is organised.
A couple of good questions in chat. Sandra's asked, what are other examples can you give of increasing the use of high controls besides putting barriers instead of lines?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Sandra. I think just because of time, I think what I'm going to do is mention two things here. So firstly, we have just produced, and it's on our website, a new good practice guide to site traffic management, and there it does have some examples of different high-level controls. And secondly, work with shop care and others in CILT to talk about what others are doing. So yeah.
Just one last one, I think. Back on Q&A. So, I think this is asking, is it compulsory to provide employees regular safety and health training and education?
Well, I guess I'd want to answer that question by turning it round and saying, well, what are you doing to manage the risk? Do you know what the risks are, and what are you doing to manage that risk? And I don't see how you could be managing a particular risk without involving employees in that and working with them. So I wouldn't want to say you have to, it's compulsory to do health and training and education every week. It's your business, you manage that the best way possible. But if you're not involving your workers, then you're going against the Health and Safety Work Act. And if they are to fulfill their duty, because workers have duties as well, then they need to have the information to be able to do that successfully and safely. So I guess I want to flip that round and saying, what else? If you're not doing that, what are you doing?
That's great. That's a lot of questions, Ruth, but great bunch of questions, Rob, from
awesome
the team
questions.
online.
Yeah, I think they definitely win as far as questions.
Yeah, I reckon.
Liz, really good. Yeah, really good. And I realise we're running a bit over, but really hope that we are able to continue the discussion on these questions, because I realise often these sort of things result in more questions than answers. But it's the beginning of a great discussion. So thanks ever so much.
Thanks, Ruth. Thanks, Rob.
So thank you to all. In turn, thank you, Ruth. Thank you, Wes. Thank you, Catherine. And thank you, Liz. And thank you, everyone, for attending today's webinar. Just a reminder that the slides that you see today will be up on the CILT website within the next few days. And also today's webinar is being recorded and will be up on the CILT NZ YouTube channel within the next few days. So I'd like to thank you all for attending, and thank you very much to the speakers. It's been enlightening, I must admit. As you know, there's many facets to working in and around vehicles safely. And I really appreciate everyone's time, and let this conversation continue, because this should not be the end of the issue here. There is much to resolve, and we look forward to being able to host you once again, Shop Care and WorkSafe, in a follow-up to this. So thank you
great
to all of you.
Thanks, Rob, and thanks, everyone. Thanks, Ruth.